What? You mean Iron Man isn't the superhero with the power to press clothes? Wolverine isn't Ben Verine's brother? The Guardians of the Galaxy aren't producing some old Ford Galaxy? In my best-selling book, Secrets of Action Screenwriting, I mention those action hero jobs we've seen too many times before. The cop, the private eye, the FBI agent. It's our job to come up with fresh and unique occupations for our heroes. You don't want a cliché character for your protagonist. You want someone interesting and different. Make sure you are creative in every aspect of your screenplay. If we've seen it before, find something we haven't seen before. Find the best job for your protagonist that hasn't been used 100 times already in other films or TV shows. Be as creative with your protagonist as you are with your concept. How about Johnny Depp as a rare book dealer who isn't above stealing a priceless book? There was a series of crimes films in the 40s about a rare book dealer, but he was an honest one. I once did a documentary film about the San Francisco Police Department's resident psychic. They called this guy in when there were no leads, and he managed to find clues the police couldn't find on their own. In the course of making my little film, I came to the conclusion that Warren was very intelligent but not psychic. That's an interesting character, a fraud psychic who still gets results. Can he keep from being discovered as a fraud? How about movies like Coma that feature doctors discovering huge medical conspiracies, or just regular guys who end up in the wrong place at the wrong time and must become action heroes in order to survive? I'm doing a rewrite on an old script of mine about an insurance executive who discovers some strange statistics. When he pokes around, he gets into big trouble. I love guy-in-a-tie action heroes. We expect someone like Arnold or Stallone to save the day, but an insurance executive? He may not even be able to survive. A normal person can stumble onto something that gets them in the midst of trouble and turns them into a reluctant action hero. But you can also find or create unusual jobs that bring your characters into action-packed situations. Let's say there's this division of the CIA where they hire people to read spy novels to see if any classified information is getting out, or if any spy novel is really some sort of coded message to enemy agents, and this guy with an English Lit degree is one of the readers, and he uncovers this global conspiracy to corner the oil market in one of these paperback books. The bad guys kill everyone in the CIA's book-reading division, but our English Lit major gets away and is on the run. The only guy who can stop this evil conspiracy, a bookworm. That's 3 days of the Condor, a great idea for a different spy hero. Jason Statham is currently on screen in A Working Man, a construction worker who helps his boss and his wife when their daughter is kidnapped by human traffickers. Statham is at an interesting point in his career where he has run out of typical badass characters to play, so writers like David Ayer are coming up with interesting and creative tough guys, like a beekeeper. I love Statham's flick Hummingbird, released as Redemption in the USA, where he plays a homeless alcoholic veteran looking for an ex-girlfriend who might have been sold into prostitution, and the film features lots of ass-kicking, plus a look at the gritty world of people who sleep in cardboard boxes and get one meal a day at a church's soup kitchen. The great thing about any genre is that it's an envelope to deliver a story to the audience, and almost any story will fit in the envelope. Which means that your character doesn't need to be a cop or an FBI profiler or a gangster or any of the cliches of the genre. They can be a beekeeper or a gardener or a bricklayer or anything else. Figure out the logical way to connect their interesting and unusual job to the action story, and you have a unique action story, something that we haven't seen before, but still delivers the ass-kicking that we expect in a film like this. I have a script called The Third Gunman about a public defender who gets stuck defending a political assassin who claims he's innocent. He says he was set up, that a second gunman killed the politico. So this low-rent lawyer pokes around and discovers a political coup here in the USA and a secret team of assassins. To stop the coup, this nobody lawyer must become the third gunman, infiltrate and destroy the assassin team and stop their plan to topple the US government. This is a boring lawyer who learns to settle things out of court with a machine gun. I also have an old script, in need of a rewrite, about a private palate who will break into a Bordeaux house and taste their wine before it's time to help futures buyers make the right decisions. He tastes something strange, and now a huge Seagrams-like company is out to get him before he discovers the truth. A wine expect action hero? That idea came from an ad in the back of Wine Spectator magazine for a wine expert who would help you decide what wines to buy. I thought that was a strange job, came up with the phrase private palate, and that made me think of Private Eyes, and that started me thinking of putting this wine taster in an action story. Part of being a screenwriter is being creative, finding the most interesting and different way to do that detective story. What if we combine the sixth sense and a detective story? A cop who sees dead people and solves crimes with the help of the victim. Wait, the CW already had a TV series about a zombie detective who eats the brains of the victims to find memory clues to the killer. That's what you need to top. All of these character ideas are your creativity and imagination at work. I think I've seen enough cops in action movies to last a lifetime. That doesn't stop me from coming up with a weird variation on the standard cop. I have a really high concept buddy cop script I'm writing in a couple of months that's unlike any buddy cop movie you've ever seen before. But I haven't written a standard cop character in years. A few years back, I had a meeting with a producer looking for a Stallone-Vin Diesel project and pitched the LAPD Vampire Division, vampire cops who work the night shift solving crimes in the Vampire District of LA, live cop undead cop. You knew there was an entire neighborhood of vampires in LA, right? Guess what? Too normal. Vampires are overused. There must have been a dozen buddy cop scripts with vampires in circulaton at the time. What Dead Drop was developed into. What if you cross Doctor, Dolittle, and a cop story? What if you could ask pet witnesses what happened? There was a script a while back called Dead Drop about the older gadget guy who makes all of those secret devices for the CIA, an inventor type, who ends up on the run when he discovers the CIA is using his devices for evil. Think of the hero of Honey. I shrunk the kids in a James Bond story, and you get the idea. That wasn't the common action hero type, and I think that's why the script sold. We've seen the action guys in a similar story, but when was the last time you saw the nerd in that story? The job is the story, and though I'm focusing on action and thriller protagonists here because those are my genres, giving your protagonist an interesting occupation that fits the story is important in every genre. I've seen too many rom-coms where the male lead was some sort of generic executive in some sort of generic office building or an ad man to last me a lifetime. Be creative. Find the unique rom-com occupation. Your protagonist's job is one of the three important elements of their character. You want to find an interesting job because that makes your protagonist more interesting. Giving them a dull or generic job makes them dull and generic. Do you really want that? Remember that your protagonist's job does have to fit the story. A weatherman action hero is unlikely, unless the story is something like Thomas Page's disaster novel, Sigmund, active about a secret government program to create killer storms for warfare purposes. Imagine it raining for 40 days and 40 nights on your enemy, and their creation escapes and cuts a path of destruction across the United States, and someone must stop it. In the novel, it was a weather scientist rather than a weather reporter, but somewhere there's a story where a weatherman hero is a perfect match. You want to make sure the protagonist's job matches the story and makes sense. You don't want to be creative and have something that makes no sense. Unique jobs also open the door to story. My private palette is a good example. Once you find a unique job, sometimes that opens the door to an unusual story. My private palette in Rough Finish is a James Bond-type guy who drinks fine wine for a living, breaks into a first-growth Bordeaux cellar to taste some wine for an investor, and becomes the man who knows too much about a huge wine scam worth millions of dollars, and now they want him dead. What was interesting to me is that I could explore the wine world in an action thriller genre and sort of take the audience on a tour of places they may never have been. We go behind the scenes in the wine business. The great thing about finding the unique job is that it allows you to explore the world of that job in your story. We've already seen the world of cops a million times. There are a couple of reality shows that explore unusual jobs, and that may be a good source for ideas, but keep your eyes and imagination open. Someone does that job. It's been my experience that producers are looking for the new twist rather than the same old hero. I've sold and had made movies about vampire hunters, naval engineers, SEC investigators, hotel owners, guests with machine guns, real estate agents in a property-based crime story, bartenders, mob-owned bar, and many other really weird occupations for action or thriller scripts. Your protagonist is your most important character. What makes them different? Instead of the cliché action thriller leads or horror leads or romantic comedy leads or western leads, why not find some job that's different, maybe even unexpected? When you're creating your protagonist, you've got to engage that imagination. If it's been done before, do something else. Okay, bonus points. In the gritty 1970s action film M.R. Majestique, based on an Elmore Leonard novel, what was tough guy Charles Bronson's job? People in screenwriting groups always complain about all of the terrible movies with terrible screenplays and wonder why nobody is buying their masterpiece. I mean, is the business rigged? Do you have to know a secret handshake to get people to read and buy your screenplay? They have all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories and point to some terrible film as an example that proves their theory. One of the things that I always say is that you can't judge a screenplay on its movie. So often the screenplay that's sold bears no resemblance to the film that was made. If you read the original screenplay, the one that they paid a ton of money for, it was worth all of that money. But along the way, this changed, and soon it became something unrecognizable by the original writer. I have been there. My original screenplay for the movie Crooked got me a bunch of studio meetings based on word of mouth. That was one of several of my screenplays that got passed around town by people who read it and landed on the desks of production companies at Warner Bros. And Paramount and Sony, leading to meetings at all of those places. It was written to be made on a budget and dealt with post-9/11 trust issues, in an action-packed cop story that had its roots in film noir. Heck, even the characters were named after famous film noir screenwriters. It was optioned by a company with a studio deal for 6 months, renewed for another 6, and they had actually begun casting the female lead in a Bruce Willis movie, and then it stalled out. But another company picked it up for 4 months and attached a director, and then it stalled out there as well. Getting a movie made is almost impossible. After that, I had a few meetings at other studios, and they often loved the writing but thought the script was too small for them, which is fine. It was written to be made on a budget. And most places asked what else I had, and I got to shovel through screenplays for a while until things just kind of petered out, as they do. I put that script aside, wrote some more scripts, got some more meetings. When a new low-budget company, people who I knew, was looking for a screenplay, I sent them a list of log lines and they read a couple of screenplays and picked this one, which worried me a little. I would rather have an established company make it because it had already gotten me studio meetings and some good option money. But I took a chance on this new company and sold it to them, and that ended up being a mistake because they changed everything. They changed the concept of the story. All of the very things that the studio-based producers loved about it were the first things to go. It's as if they took my studio screenplay and turned it into the B-movie version. Anyone seeing it would wonder why they bought this terrible screenplay instead of their great one. Heck, I even wondered that. I wasn't there for any of these changes, but I suspect that many had to do with casting. Someone, not me, did rewrites to make the casting work, and those rewrites changed important parts of the story. I did one rewrite for casting that I hated when they cast a name in a small role, and either the name or the producer wanted more scenes with the name, who died on page 3 or 4 of the script. So they had to live a little longer, which screwed things up. And with every bit of casting, the story evolved to fit these people, and soon it wasn't anything like what I wrote. One of the more amusing parts of this was the actor cast as the villain, who I was against because they always played villains, and this script used to have a mystery element in it. So the mystery element went out the window, which meant the story didn't work at all, which meant they tried to prop up the story in another way, and soon everything is different and worse. And that name actor who usually plays villains, I guess they had problems with him and killed his character off halfway through the film just to get rid of the actor, so someone else had to become the villain, and it didn't make any sense. And this happens on big Hollywood movies all the time. Check out my blog entry on the flop version of Robin Hood by Ridley Scott, which began as a screenplay that wasn't even about Robin Hood that sold for a pile of money. I have read that original screenplay. It was worth the money. Or look up the history of Dead Drop, hot screenplay, to Chain Reaction, flop film, or even Premonition, hot screenplay, to Armageddon, completely different story. What goes in one side isn't what comes out the other. The constant changes can turn a silk purse into a sow's ear. It seldom works the other way. When they buy a screenplay because it is the best version of the story, when they change it again and again, it usually doesn't get better. There's a script tip on how casting often changes the story. If the character is a shy brainiac who solves problems with their mind and they cast The Rock, he becomes an action hero, and that only changes everything. That happens constantly with studio films. So let's look at another way that bad movies can be made. Let's work together. Let's get into the DeLorean and get it up to 88 miles per hour in 2001 when I first wrote this script tip. At Cannes in 2001, Tom Cruise, promoting The Others, which he produced, bumps into the late John Frankenheimer, promoting his BMW commercial Ambush, written by Andrew Kevin Walker. Cruise loves Seconds and Birdman of Alcatraz and really loves The Gypsy Moths, 1969. The two hit it off. We ought to work together someday. Frankenheimer tells his agent he'd love to do a sequel to The Gypsy Moths and that Tom Cruise is interested in it. It isn't a script at this time. It's a conversation in a bar at 2 a.m. between an actor and a director. This is one of the way that movies get made. Two people who can get a film made decide to get a film made, even if there is no screenplay to make. The studio realizes Gypsy Moths was about skydiving, and they already own a skydiving action film script. In fact, they've spent millions on a bunch of writers who still can't get it right, and this may be a way to recoup some of that money. Now, if you have seen the Frankenheimer film, it is not an action movie. It's a drama where the characters have an active lifestyle. To make the drama exciting, the lead characters are a band of daredevil skydivers who go from town to town putting on exhibitions, kind of like a carnival. They often find a family to stay with to cut down on expenses, and this story is about the interactions between the daredevil skydivers and this small town family on the days leading up to the big exhibition. Because these are exciting people, wives often cheat on their husbands with these guys, and this creates all kinds of drama. It's a swell movie, but it is in no way an action film. But the studio owns an action script about skydivers, and let's face it, Cruise and Frankenheimer equals hit. So they get the script to the actor and director and have a go project. The film is now put on the release schedule for July 2nd, 2003. Because this is a business, and they have to choose a release date before they have made the film, ready or not, here it comes. July 2nd, 2003. Tom Cruise will be doing his own stunts in John Frankenheimer's Gypsy Moths 2. Wait, it's still a crappy script. But at this point in time, that doesn't matter. The studio has a huge star and a veteran director attached to the project. That's a movie, folks. Posters are designed. Teaser trailers are tacked onto the front of Vanilla Sky. Full-page ads pop up in the trades. More writers are thrown on the script. They get it half good, which means half crap, by the way. It's still an action script that has nothing to do with the original film, which starred Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr as the housewife who cheats, and Gene Hackman and Scott Wilson and Bonnie Bedelia and Sherry Noth and William Wyndham. Though Lancaster starred in his share of action films, he was also a great dramatic actor who looked for challenging roles. So this 30-plus years later sequel has nothing to do with the original, except for the title. I'm sure that you have seen at least one of those. But the screenplay is still half crap, and everyone knows it. Runaway Train. Okay, you're the head of the studio producing this mess. Start date for filming is 2 weeks away. Do you pull the plug because the script sucks? If you delay the project, you'll lose Cruise to Mission Impossible 3. He has a busy schedule. Frankenheimer has other projects in the works too. A sequel to The Exorcist, believe it or not. The problem is, if you stop the train, you'll never get it started again. You have to ride it to the end of the tracks. Even if the tracks go off a cliff, you don't really know where the tracks lead at this time. The project has also built up some weird momentum. Gene Hackman, who was the young romantic lead in Gypsy Moths, worked with Cruise on The Firm, comes out of retirement and signs on to reprise his role. Demi Moore is trying to get back into the business and signs on as the female lead. She worked with Tom in A Few Good Men. The cast just keeps attracting cast. So you put a bad script into production and pray that Frankenheimer can keep it moving fast enough that no one will notice how lame it is, and that Cruise will flash that smile and make the thing a hit. If you pull the plug, you have nothing. Plus, you're out all of those millions of dollars you spent throwing writers on the project trying to make it work. If you make the bad script, it's possible that Gypsy Moths 2, Too Close to the Flame, will overcome the bad script to make $550 million worldwide, right? Mission Impossible. 2 made a ton of money, $546 million, and it didn't make any sense at all. The strange part about a movie is that sometimes a movie has all of the ingredients that the audience wants to see at that particular time, and what we screenwriters think of as quality doesn't matter. It has the other qualities. Explosions, Tom Cruise smiling a lot, the return of Gene Hackman, cool skydiving stunts. This train is speeding down the tracks. Once a project actually gets started, no one wants to stop it. Even if it stinks, it's a runaway train. Then we line up to see it on some hot summer Friday night a year from now, and while the closing credits are rolling, we're wondering how all of these talented people could make a film with a script that just sucks. Didn't anyone read the script? If a film has enough momentum, enough names signed to the project, the script doesn't matter. It should matter, but it doesn't. High-octane screenwriting. Now let's get back in the DeLorean and head back to COVID country. I made up Gypsy Moths 2 back in 2001 after reading about Cruise and Frankenheimer bumping into each other at Cannes, but there are plenty of real movies like that, and we will look at one in a moment. Here's our problem as screenwriters. We have to write a script that's so good that a studio will dump the all-star cast Gypsy Moths 2, Too Close to the Flame, and make ours instead. Except that isn't going to actually happen. The reality is that even if Out's screenplay is amazing, they are still going to make that bad script because it gets a big-name actor and a big-name director together. Do you remember that irritating remake of War of the Worlds, 2005, that starred Cruise and was directed by Spielberg? That came about because Cruise wanted to work with Spielberg again, and when Spielberg had a project stall out, Indy 4, he had a hole in his schedule and decided to make it. There was a screenplay that was in development, though it wasn't supposed to be shot until 2007. Hey, star and director are available, let's just make it now. We'll fix the screenplay in the days before production starts. That's Hollywood, folks. When you see that terrible film, you can't say, I can write better than that, because of course you can, anyone can. That was a film that didn't work. Nobody is looking to make another one of those. They are looking for the great screenplay that can go through all of the crap that happens along the way and is still okay. The high-octane screenplay that can be watered down again and again on its way to the screen and still get the car started and going fast enough to hit 88 miles per hour. My friends Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott have a column over on Wordplay called Crap Plus One about seeing a terrible film and thinking that you can write better than that. When the goal isn't a screenplay that is slightly less crappy, the goal is a screenplay that can have all kinds of crap done to it and still be pretty good. That's what you should be aiming for. The screenplay that is so good that it can withstand all of the problems heaped on it along the way. You can't judge a script by its movie. Now it's time to get back to work. I know my script needs a couple more rewrites. Next movie tip for writers. Novels and screenplays are two entirely different animals. The writer of a brilliant novel may not have the skills required to write a screenplay, and vice versa. Though for the most part, these skills can be learned, so a brilliant novelist can probably write a brilliant screenplay, and vice versa. But they are different mediums and require different skills. Just because I can drive a car doesn't mean I will instantly know how to fly a plane, and techniques and literary devices that work well in novels often don't work at all in a screenplay. Can you imagine a film that is nothing but correspondence projected on the screen? Epistolary novels. Yet writers often attempt to use a technique that works in one medium in another, with varied degrees of success and failure. Many novels contain multiple plot threads that eventually connect at the end. When I was offered the job of adapting Angels and Demons, the main reason why I turned it down was because it had two separate plots that eventually came together at the end, and that usually doesn't work on film. We only have a couple of hours to tell a film story, and telling one story in that amount of time is usually a challenge. Plus, the shifting back and forth between stories can be confusing and often lessens audience identification and involvement. As I've said in other script tips, one movie, one story. Multiple stories is a device that works well in novels but is close to impossible to pull off on screen. But what if you want to give it a try? This script tip explores the methods that work best when you plan on telling two stories in one screenplay. The great Dalton Trumbo adapted Edward Abbey's novel into Lonely Are the Brave, with two stories which meet up at the end with a bang, and it's a great film. But part of that is our foreknowledge that Carroll O'Connor's truck driver and Kirk Douglas's cowboy are on a collision course. Part of the adaptation was to give O'Connor's trucker very little screen time. The script focuses on Douglas's story thread. The novel was called Brave Cowboy, Not Truck Driver. In a strange way, this movie is the predecessor of First Blood. An entire story thread about a draft dodger never made it to film at all, and the small-town sheriff exists only as part of the cowboy story in the film. Part of adapting a multiple-story novel is often picking which of the stories to tell and jettisoning the others. COPVSCROOK. So when Steve Zellian, the closest thing we have to Dalton Trumbo today, came out with his new film American Gangster, I was prepared to love it, but I didn't. People have asked me about the structure, the idea of cop and crook stories that come together at the end. That's been done many times. The best of them is Michael Mann's Heat. In Heat, the cop, Al Pacino, and the crook, Robert De Niro, really only have one scene together, and it's one hell of a scene. Compare that scene to the Denzel Washington to Russell Crowe scene in Gangster. Kind of disappointing. If you look at Heat, there are three stories. 1. The cop chasing the crook. From early on, Pacino is chasing the Wrecking Crew guys, trying to get a beat on them, following them, spying on them, interacting with them in some way. Though Pacino and De Niro only have the one scene, the rest of the movie is cat and mouse with Pacino chasing De Niro and his men, actively pursuing them. There is direct conflict between Pacino's team and De Niro's team from the very beginning of the movie until the very end. That conflict is what drives the story. In American Gangster, Russell Crowe is after drug dealers and targeting Blue Magic, but we mostly see the big board and not much actual investigation on his part, and he has no idea Denzel and his team even exist. Until the very end of the movie, Crowe believes that Italians are behind the drug trade, with the African Americans just doing the sales work. The concept that an African American is the big drug kingpin comes very late in the film. Eventually, we have the undercover buy scene, and that takes us to the dirty cops rather than Denzel and his crew, so it's really a dead end. Not much actual pursuit or police work in Gangster, and no direct conflict between cops and crooks. Story is conflict. Without that direct conflict, we have two separate stories until the very end. 2. The Crook's Life. Here's where Heat totally kicks ass over American Gangster. Early on, De Niro gives his big rule for surviving as an armed robber. Don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner. This rule makes him a man alone, who claims he's not lonely, but who does he think he's fooling? Right after he reveals this rule, he meets a woman in a bookstore and begins a relationship. This creates a great conflict. We want De Niro to find love and have a relationship, but we know this violates his big rule, and that rule is there for a reason. So we are torn. Should he keep her? Dump her? And as the police close in, the relationship is in jeopardy. The crook's life story is directly tied to the cop and crook story. In American Gangster, they attempt to contrast Denzel as the family man with Crowe as the guy losing his family in a divorce, but there is no conflict in either story. Denzel just rises to power and brings his family along. Sure, there's a quick scene with a brother who screws up, but there is no drama built into his story. he just rises to power. If you just compare the Denzel part of the story to a movie like Scarface, either version but Pacino stars in the remake, it's also the lesser film. In Scarface, with Have Tony coming to America with nothing and struggling to work his way to the top. Every step to the top is filled with conflict and chainsaws and bathtubs. Denzel starts out as Bumpy's right-hand man, the number 2 guy, and after Bumpy is killed, he instantly becomes the number 1 guy. No conflict, no struggle, it's automatic. Now he's more intelligent than Bumpy and manages to build his empire, but it's a pre-existing empire, not as dramatic as starting with nothing and fighting your way to the top. Hey, I'm not even going to mention the wife-sister emotional conflicts in Scarface. So even if we just look at the gangster side of the story, Gangster is lacking the drama and emotional conflicts that other gangster movies have. That makes it difficult to sustain this half of the 2-story movie. If each story were exciting on its own, we have something to involve us in each story until they come together at the end. Okay, and now let's compare the crimes these crooks are involved in. In American Gangster, Denzel is basically on the phone making deals, or in Thailand making deals. Neither is exciting, though it may be interesting. On an intellectual level that he's treating drugs as a business, movies are visceral. They are emotional rather than intellectual. Watching a businessman do business is dull. The most excitement we get in Denzel's story is when he blows away a rival during lunch, and that's a great scene. It contrasts the concept of business and crime. What we needed were fewer scenes of Denzel doing deals and more scenes with Denzel doing away with rivals. Except that would turn him into a gangster instead of a businessman. There are some cool movies that look at the business of crime, including that Godfather movie starring De Niro and Pacino. But Michael Corleone wasn't afraid to mix business and murder. That was the point. When we soft-pedal the crime aspects of a criminal business, we end up removing the conflict and ending up with a movie about making deals, and that doesn't even have as much conflict as an episode of The Office. If Denzel Washington is playing a crook, he needs to act like it. In Heat, Robert De Niro is involved in armed robbery, and we not only get that great set-piece robbery and shootout, we get all kinds of action along the way. Shootouts, suspense, chases. You could remove every element of the Pacino story and still have a great film. Now, Denzel's story could have focused on the action side of his business. A previous version of this story, Larry Cohen's Black Saucer, focused on the war between the black crime lord and the mafia, but it focused on the businessman side. You may say, hey, that's the story. But watching a guy make phone calls is boring. Not the best choice for a story about a crook. Even though Heat has that great street shootout, what makes it more involving than Gangster isn't the action, it's the conflict. Sure, that conflict is explored through machine gun fire, but it could have been dramatic conflict. We need conflict for drama, and then we need to actually have dramatic scenes. The closest Gangster gets to any sort of conflict is that quick scene when Frank's brother, Huey, the always amazing Chiwetel Ejiofor, screws up, but this is resolved almost immediately. The conflict doesn't build, it's just a quick episode in the gangster's life. 3. The cop's life. In Heat, Pacino is having the same kind of relationship issues as Crow in Gangster. Both are dealing with real teenship and family issues, the difficulties of a cop's life on a family, but those problems are tied to the cop chases crook story in Heat and connected to nothing at all in American Gangster. In Heat, every time Pacino needs to spend time with his wife or daughter, the case comes up and he has to dump them, creating big dramatic conflicts. He is constantly having to choose between job and family, and he picks job every time. This escalates his family problems. Even when he is with his wife, there is conflict about the times he wasn't with her. The conflict escalates throughout the story, coming to a big breaking point when his daughter needs to be rushed to the hospital at the moment the case is really breaking. Now there's a dramatic decision. Compare this to Crow in American Gangster, who gets a bunch of fairly dull scenes in court getting a divorce and then not fighting for joint custody of his daughter. Crow doesn't even try to keep his relationship going, which makes his life non-dramatic. The relationship is dead when the film begins, and just stays dead. No conflict, no struggle, no drama. Now you may say, hey, based on a true story, what choice did they have? Well, no story on film is really true. Everything gets dramatized. And the other folks who were involved seem to think Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts exaggerated everything and made them the stars. When there were two other major black crime lords in New York at the time, one doesn't even get mentioned in the film, and that is the guy who, up until this film, was seen as the #1 black crime lord of all time. If they fudge some major things in the story, why not fudge some minor ones and make it more dramatic? Instead of starting out with Richie's marriage on the rocks, why not show it disintegrating, more dramatic, throughout the film? If you are going to fudge the facts here and there, do it to make a better film, a more dramatic film. Though American Gangster got a couple of Oscar nominations, Heat is the movie that people quote lines from and buy on DVD. I think Gangster will end up a forgotten footnote, and Heat will remain a classic. The key to any story is conflict. If you have multiple story threads, the key is to make sure each thread has a strong conflict that escalates throughout that thread, creating dramatic scenes. You don't need to have cars and buildings exploding, but people's tempers need to explode. Film is a dramatic medium, so we need to see that drama exploding on screen. A novel can be internal, a film is only what we can see and hear, externals. We need to bring the conflict to the surface in dramatic confrontations, with or without automatic weapons. And while each story thread has its conflict, each story thread must impact the other to create conflict and drama. All of the threads end up part of the big story, so they must be connected, entwined. Heat and American Gangster are similar stories, yet where Heat is an amazing, exciting, involving epic, American Gangster is an epic-style film with two great actors that looks good and tells a story, but comes off like a dull documentary, uninvolving. The key to telling any story is conflict. The key to telling more than one story in a film is also conflict. The more you fracture the film, the more important conflict becomes. Next movie tip. Paramount has been having some problems with the Star Trek reboots. Fans don't seem to like them. Despite being directed by Fast and Furious's Justin Lin, the last film only made $159 million domestic on a budget of $185 million, or maybe more. Now it looks like the QT reboot with John Travolta as Kirk and Samuel L. Jackson as Spock and Pam Grier as Uhura, and that whole killing on foot massage subplot has been canceled. The shows are doing okay on TV, but movies seem to not be working right now. Is the franchise on film doomed? Where and when did it go wrong? One of the first scenes in Star Trek Nemesis has Captain Picard, Data, and I think Worf are scooting around this desert planet in a dune buggy collecting pieces of an android that has been cut up and scattered across the wasteland. Did anyone wonder why, when a trio of dune buggies appear on the horizon? They grab the android's head, toss it in the back of the dune buggy, and take off. The three other dune buggies give chase. Picard drives his dune buggy like a madman as they exchange machine gun fire with the three dune buggies. It's a huge action scene, right out of Road Warrior. Eventually, a couple of the dune buggies crash, alien lives may have been lost, and the last dune buggy chases them into an amazing stunt sequence where they drive off a cliff into the cargo bay of their landing craft and fly out of there. It was never explained who the aliens were in the three dune buggies, why they were chasing Picard, and why they thought exchanging gunfire was the proper way to greet a Federation landing party. The action scene didn't really serve any purpose at all, except create an excuse for the CGI-created stunt and open the film with a bang. We always want to hit the ground running with our screenplays, but it is more important to involve the reader-viewer than just excite them. If you start with an action scene, make sure it has some emotional component as well, to pull us into the story and make us want to keep watching, reading. If anyone ever decides to circulate a petition demanding more characterization and drama in action films, you can bet I'll be the first person to sign it. The reason why I fell in love with the Hong Kong films of John Woo is that they managed to explore character like no other testosterone films had been able to do since we lost Sam Peckinpah in 1978. He continued making movies after that, but he was completely lost except for Cross of Iron. Woo's best films, like Bullet in the Head and A Better Tomorrow and The Killer, are all about the characters. They are relationship movies. The action sequences place the characters in kill or be killed situations and force drama to the surface. When Woo came to America, his films went downhill. The action is still there, but not the character. Face Off was a step in the right direction, and Wind Talkers looked promising, but ended up being a small drama about Nick Cage partnered with a Navajo who he must protect him with his life, unless they're captured, with a bunch of huge, pointless action scenes grafted on. It was everything that's wrong with crepey Hollywood action flicks. You got character in my action. Even though I'm for more character in action films, there's a right way to add it and a wrong way. Imagine an action film that opens with 80 minutes of character scenes, then has a solid 40 minutes of nonstop action. You probably see the problem already. The character scenes are separate from the action scenes. It's like there are two different movies glued together. From the 80 minutes of serious character drama, we'd never guess that the next 40 minutes will be wall-to-wall action. The action seems out of place, or the character seems out of place. Neither part matches the other. We not only want to create a balance between action and character, we want to use action to explore character. We want the action scenes to be about character, to demonstrate character through actions and reactions to events. And to make things worse, those 40 minutes are character-free action, just lots of big explosions. In fact, our lead characters aren't even involved in the action. The first 80 minutes of the Pearl Harbor set up our two pilot heroes who are best friends and the romantic triangle with a pretty nurse. There's the friendship between Rafe McCauley, Ben Affleck, and Danny Walker, Josh Hartnett. Danny's drunk dad, scared by the Great War. There's the romance between Rafe and Evelyn, Kate Beckinsale, which includes a whole lot of revolving doors in the Queen Mary. When Rafe is assigned to the Eagle Squadron in England, there's a lot of letter writing and reading at sunset. Then a plot twist throws Evelyn into Danny's arms. A whole new relationship starts and must be shown one painstakingly detailed step at a time. Eventually, Rafe returns and we have a love triangle, best friends in love with the same woman. Oh yeah, and she's pregnant by one of them. More overly dramatic stuff, which ends with a big fistfight between Rafe and Danny that brings the MPs, so the two escape in a car together and sleep off their drunk under the stars. Waking to find Pearl Harbor under attack and that 40 minutes of action kicking in. But our heroes aren't involved in the action at all. The ships in the harbor are bombed, huge action scenes that are completely uninvolving because neither Rafe nor Danny are on the ships or know anyone on the ships. This is the centerpiece of the 40 minutes of action, and our two leads aren't even on hand. They have no stake in the outcome, and all of the guys who get blown to pieces on the ships or fight valiantly only to die are total strangers to our leads and the audience. Rafe and Danny race to the airfield, arriving in time to see every plane get blown to smithereens, but they are observers in this scene, not really participants. Finally, they get to the repair yard and grab a couple of planes for a short action sequence actually involving the heroes, but by then it's too late. In a really weird move to make them look like they're involved in a story that has nothing to do with them, Danny and Rafe are pasted into a scene where they try to rescue crew members of the Arizona who are trapped on the sinking ship. But the men on the Arizona are strangers to us, non-characters. The most dramatic incident in the entire Pearl Harbor attack, and it happens to a bunch of people we've never seen before and don't care about. So how could we have made that big scene work? How could have integrated character into the action? There's a scene where Danny and the pilots toast to absent friend Rafe in private. What if that scene had taken place in the hula bar? What if a drunken Danny had gotten in a fight with some sailor from Arizona? Some sailor much bigger than Danny. So Danny ends up using a bar stool as a shield, eventually pinning the sailor to the floor with the legs and sitting on the stool to hold the sailor in place. Danny tells the sailor, "If I ever see you again, you're dead. Understand?" When the sailor finally says he understands, Danny lets him go. After the attack, the Arizona is sinking with men trapped on board, and Danny tries to rescue them. Guess which sailor is trapped in the section Danny is working on? Trapped the same way Danny had him trapped under the bar stool, pleading for Danny to help him. Danny does everything possible. He knows this guy. We know this guy. He's not just some faceless sailor, he's a character. Danny has a stake in rescuing him. When Danny fails to rescue the sailor, the words from the bar haunt him. "If I ever see you again, you're dead." Danny hasn't just failed to rescue the trapped sailor, he may be responsible for his death. He feels responsible for his death. The sailor's death affects Danny, adding character to the action. A better method would have been to choose characters who are actually involved in the story so that the action scenes are also character scenes. Find a way to integrate character into your action scenes to make the actions demonstrate character. Action scenes are character scenes, except in duds like Star Trek, Nemesis, Pearl Harbor, Transformers, and Mission Impossible. 3. And the first two Star Trek reboots' action scenes were as character-free as MI3's. If you can cut out the action scene and it doesn't impact the story, you should cut out the action scene. Next tip. How can anyone expect one scene to advance the story, give us character information, be entertaining? I mean, can't a scene just exist because it's cool, because it's funny, because things blow up real good? Nope. Even in a comedy, a scene has to pull its own weight. It has to advance the story and give us character information. I thought of the silliest scene from the silliest movie I could think of and came up with this one from Airplane. The autopilot, a blow-up pilot played by Otto, is flying the plane after the pilot, co-pilot, and navigator have fallen ill. When the autopilot begins to deflate and the plane goes out of control, the panicked flight attendant Elaine, Julie Haggerty, radios the tower, and they tell her to re-inflate the autopilot by blowing into a valve on the autopilot's belt. As she's doing this, Dr. Rumack, Leslie Nielsen, walks in, thinks she's having oral sex with the autopilot, and leaves. Once the autopilot is re-inflated, the plane stabilizes and the flight attendant and autopilot are shown having a post-sex cigarette. Okay, that's pretty silly. Does it advance the story and give us character information? Yes. This scene tells us that the autopilot is unreliable. They need an actual pilot in the cockpit. Our hero, Ted Stryker, Robert Hayes, is a pilot with a drinking problem who is afraid to fly. This is the scene that makes him have to fly the plane. We know that the autopilot isn't the answer after this scene. It may deflate again. If you remove this scene, the plot portion of the story would suffer. The audience would wonder why they needed Stryker to fly the plane when they have the perfectly good autopilot. The autopilot doesn't have a drinking problem and was designed to fly a 747. From a character standpoint, you also need this scene. Because Stryker and the Elaine break up in the first scene, we need to show that she is getting on with her life and he is still stuck on her. How are we going to show her going on a date when the whole film takes place in the plane? You know that post-sex cigarette gag? That's a character bit too. That shows that she has moved on. That Stryker is going to have to win her back. Without that scene, the audience might think she's still possibly in love with him, that he may have a chance to win her back. But this scene gives us the character information that tells us otherwise. So that silly scene has asterisk critical character and plot information. It's also funny. It's a scene that does it all. Every scene in your script should be critical to the story. If you can remove the scene and it doesn't change the story, get rid of it. Or find the way to make it work by combining it with other scenes or by finding ways to include important information in the scene. That information doesn't need to be obvious, and it shouldn't be obvious. The key to a good scene is that it gives the audience all kinds of information in a way that doesn't make them think they are getting information. They think it's a silly comedy scene, but we know it's a character and story scene. In the Scenes Blue Book, we look at that scene from Fargo where she meets with her friend from high school and how that scene is critical to the story. There isn't enough time in a movie for a scene that has no purpose, which is why we always want to find scenes that do it all. How do we create scenes like that? Combining scenes. Let's say you have a scene where we introduce our hero and his family, a loving wife and his kids, including a teenage daughter who is a real heartbreaker. He's a real family man, still passionate about his wife after years of marriage. You have another scene where our hero's family surprises him with a 50th birthday party, singing "Happy Birthday to You." They have a cake with so many candles on top it looks like a fire hazard. He tries to blow them all out, but it takes a couple of tries. A third scene has own hero in the bathtub, noticing all of the gray in his beard. Does the beard make him look old? Does it make him look all of those 50 years? He decides to shave it off. 3 scenes that show us aspects of our hero, but all are scenes we've seen before. So why not combine all 3 into a single scene? Our hero is in the bathtub noticing all of the gray in his beard when his family bursts through the door with a birthday cake singing "Happy Birthday to You." It takes him a couple of tries to blow out all of the candles. Man, he really is old. His wife gives him a big kiss. He tries to pull her into the tub. The kids are all over the place. His heartbreaker daughter is obviously his favorite. When they leave, he realizes how old 50 really is and shaves off his beard. By combining the scenes, we create a brand new scene, one we've never seen before. Okay, maybe you have seen it. It's Danny Glover's introduction scene in Lethal Weapon, another scene that does it all. You may not have realized how much information was in that scene when you saw the movie, but it's packed with things we need to know about this character. By combining scenes, we save valuable screen time for more important scenes, and we are able to create scenes that have more weight, even though they may seem light as a feather. Our scenes are like suitcases packed for a vacation. We want to get as many things into those suitcases as we can so that we aren't lugging around a half-dozen suitcases. We want one suitcase that has been carefully packed so that it contains everything we need and has wheels of entertainment so that it glides through the airport and doesn't seem heavy. The audience only sees the glide. They don't realize how much you have packed into that suitcase. Combining scenes is also a great way to manage our script length. If we create one scene that does 3 things, that means we won't end up with a 300-page screenplay. Is this scene necessary? A novel has an unlimited number of pages to tell its story. A screenplay has no more than 120. That means there's no room for meandering, no room for any sequence, scene, page, or even word that doesn't move the story forward. The average finished film is going to cost about $1 million per page by the time it gets to the screen, so you don't want to waste any pages on unimportant scenes. Is every scene in your script required to tell the story, or are you wasting the audience's time? There isn't enough room for a scene that has nothing to do with the story. There are no scenes in a screenplay that are only about character, not enough room for that. A scene about character must also move the story forward as well as being entertaining in some way. It must do 3 things at once. Is that difficult? Of course, nobody ever said screenwriting was going to be easy. We have to tell a story with 1/10 the words of a novelist. That requires concise writing. Every scene matters. Take a hard look at each of your scenes. Does the story require this scene? If you can remove the scene with no damage to the story, get rid of it. Even if it is an action scene or a comedy scene, it may be the greatest scene in your script, but you are wasting the audience's time with it. The audience isn't there to watch a collection of great scenes. They are there for the story. They want to know what happens next. Here are a couple of ways to test your scenes. House of Cards. Make sure each individual scene is focused on the objectives of the script. The small objectives have to lead to the big objectives. Think of your script as a house of cards. Each scene is a card. If you can remove any scene and the house remains standing, that scene shouldn't have been in your script. Not only should each scene move the story forward, each scene should also be a microcosm of the story. Every scene should contain the DNA necessary to clone the entire script. You should be able to read any scene from your script and have some idea of what the whole script is about. What is the central conflict of your screenplay? How does this scene explore that conflict? Does this scene explore the theme? If you were to read only this scene, could you tell me what the entire script is about? This is part of what I call organic screenwriting. Each scene has to be integral to the story, not just filler material. Each scene should expose character, move the story forward, and deal with the central conflict of the screenplay, the script's DNA. The Memento Challenge. A script should, like a shark, always moving forward. Each scene creates the next scene. Think of it as cause and effect. Scene 1 causes scene 2 causes scene 3, etc. A great way to find deadwood scenes in your script is to work backwards. Start with the very last scene and make sure it was caused by the scene right before it. Work your way backwards through the script. If you come to a scene that didn't create the scene that comes right after it, you should probably cut that scene. Any scene that doesn't have anything to do with the central conflict of the story should be removed. It's not part of the story you are telling. A script that isn't moving forward, a script that gets stalled by a scene or series of scenes that don't move the story, is a dead shark. Subplot scenes often end up major offenders and need to be cut, because your subplot may not have anything to do with your main plot, and that's a problem. Notice how in AIRPLANE, Elaine's silly sex scene with Otto the autopilot seems like it has nothing to do with our main story about Ted Stryker the pilot with the drinking problem, except it actually does. Just because a scene doesn't seem to have any bearing on the main story at first glance doesn't mean that it isn't critical to the story. Look closer. This subplot scene is required for the main plot to work in a couple of different ways. You want scenes that are filled with information but aren't banging the audience over the head with that information. Scenes that do it all, but may just seem silly or suspenseful or exciting or scary or whatever. Juice required for whatever genre you are working in. Stealth scenes that do it all. More of creating complex scenes in the Scenes Blue Book. More of creating complex scenes in the Scenes Blue Book.